Now we're on. But at least I got some words in. I mean, we were just talking about, for the viewers that are on our Ustream, we were just talking about most of the time about uh what what the well, I started off in healthcare and then kind of went off more into abortion and how and how that kind of plays into like with foster children and all that, and what kind of process they put themselves through when it comes down to it. But I mean, you really have to see from a standpoint of the family and the family as a whole on how something like that can affect a child. And you know, there are those places like I mean, underdeveloped areas, certain like in outer cities, like I mean, they consider them the ghettos or the projects or something like that, or anything under that term of use. But I mean, I use that very freely. I don't mean it to mean offensive, but uh, sometimes those aren't the most well-off places for most of those kids. But you know, I mean, and bringing it back down to abortion, whether or not you want to kill a child is very, very muddling on the issue. But you know, but let's move on from something like that. I'm not too very keen. I know Bill really likes national issues, and he's a very keen patriot, as am I. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that most of my friend groups don't even most of my friend groups most of my friends in many other groups that I so participated in, I guess, no, that I'm friends with, that really don't know about me, is that I'm an extreme patriot. I love my country. I mean, I'd lay my life down. I mean, stemming off from my childhood, and I volunteered most of the time throughout the American Legion, which deals with most veterans. Well, I mean, all veterans that do participate, and I really like the way they organize themselves, specifically in times of, you know, when it comes to the veterans' needs and whatnot. I mean, it's just interesting to see how these groups are so supportive towards their veterans and how they go about it, and I really like that. I mean, I feel like that's an issue, not an issue, a thing that should be funded across the nation, and it's one of the biggest organizations in the country today. And just going to Boise State, I mean, being as a citizen there, which was Boise State is a program where juniors, soon to be seniors, go, and they learn mostly about the government, how it's organized, and how they go about, basically how it's organized, and then they form cities, and then they go stem off into that, and then they select, at the end of the week, they select a governor, a vice governor, or some sort, and 2 senators, and the 2 senators actually get the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., tour Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, and meet the president, which is also humongous honor from what I've heard. I did not get that honor, sadly. I mean, a very competitive competitor towards mine. We've had very contradicting views. He's had very contradicting views towards me specifically. I won't stem off into that, but that was very very interesting, to say the least. I'm very bitter about that, I'd say. But just keeping on track about Boise State and such good that they do. I just love the whole Veterans Association, and it's kind of really stemmed my passion for possibly military service, probably serving among the elite, special forces or anything like that. I think that's a personality trait that most people don't know about me, but I mean, considering there's no one else in the studio right now other than my producers and the out there, but which I just found out were listening in, as well as my mother. But you know, we all go about our day. But yeah, but going on, but Boise State was such a huge impact onto me and whatnot. And I thought it was just really awesome about what these veterans did for not only their country but for these kids. And it's just really awesome to see how that stems onto how they go about organizing this whole program. And I'm really excited to go back in late May as well, do my awesome trip down to Pueblo, Colorado. But that's not also secluded to Denver, Colorado, because when those 2 senators go off to D.C., they're met with 2 representatives from every other state within our nation, and it's kind of cool to see how they go about interacting as well. I mean, I couldn't speak from personal experience from But from what I've heard, it's awesome because then they elect a president, vice president, and it's really cool because I mean it just brings a whole nation together. It kind of really shows you what these veterans sacrifice, especially I mean it's just what they sacrifice as a whole. I mean there is a huge price to freedom, and I feel like most Americans take that for granted, but thank God they do, because it's something that they sacrificed for, so that they wouldn't have to experience something like that, and then that the chosen few can go out and pay that price. And but I mean, keeping on track, other programs that I've somewhat been involved in. I mean, with the debate back in high school, shout out to Marty Benham, our debate team captain back in Cherry Creek High School. But that was also a really fun time for me, because I learned more of my political background as a libertarian, and how much of a middle ground they are. I mean I know I share the show with a very competitive conservative, one in fact that brings forth their religious background more so in the Conservative Party. And I know Ted Nugent, I think Ted Nugent is the name, if I'm getting that wrong, just declared his presidency for the 2016 election. But yeah, I mean my main thing, as I said earlier, was for the viewers that realized I wasn't on air, but one of the biggest issues that I concern myself with is foreign policy, and I really love foreign policy as a whole, and where I've really put most of my concentration is of course the Iraqi war, and of course in Afghanistan and whatnot. So basically the whole Middle East as a whole, and just what's going on over there, especially within Israel and Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, like I said before. But just some of the key factors that play a role in that, especially early on at the start of the 21st century, even before, a little bit before that, when Saddam Hussein moved most of its nuclear weapons to Iraq. I mean, we went over there with the intentions that they were still there, but later on found that they weren't there. I mean, from my greater assumption, I would assume that he moved them over to Syria, seeing that there are recent developments with those nuclear weapons. But I mean, you have to look at the bigger picture. I'm like, what really was the man trying to accomplish? I mean, the guy went into hiding necessarily, and rightfully so. He was executed later on once found. But then you have such terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda, and now up until recently ISIS, that's basically controlled all of Iraq and Syria. And it brought forth a really interesting standpoint from what I've heard from a friend of mine about how ISIS as a whole, from his basic assumption, he thought that they were trying to recreate the Ottoman Empire. And I pondered this a little bit more so, and for our viewers that don't know, the Ottoman Empire was a greater Muslim society that prized itself on its Muslim religion and wanted to live a perfect Muslim life. And what was interesting about this is that they didn't necessarily taxed or aggressively went against those who weren't for the religion, but they wanted people that were going to help ensue a perfect Muslim life, and they didn't want anything to counter that, but they didn't want any conflicts throughout greater borders. And I thought that was a greater stem onto what was going to happen. The only reason I argued against my friend in that statement is that with ISIS, the Islamic State of Greater Syria, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, of Greater Syria, and then you have ISIL, another name that they prefer, which is Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Leviathan, and how they went about their executions, of course, that made them infamous as well. But you see how that they're vaguely, the Ottoman Empire and ISIS are very vaguely different, because you see how ISIS is going about killing innocent people just to prove that they want the Muslim religion, not necessarily the Muslim religion, but more so their way of life, their interpretation of Islam, to be the prominent thing in those two countries. And and he brought up the sorry, the computer just logged out, but I'll keep talking. He brought up the factor of how. I'll talk in a second. I just want to get this. Com 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, now you know how to get on the computer. And so as I was saying, you see how they're vaguely different in the idea that how they're more aggressively bringing up Islam in a sense that they don't want any outside interaction with the rest of the world. And what's difficult with that kind of portion of the world in the Middle East is that it's such a not necessarily a landlocked area, but more so it's such a an area, or geographically wise, that it's just so I can't really describe the word, find a word, so I might as well just describe it. It's in a very vulnerable area, and I remember Prime Minister Bibi. I'm not gonna say his full name, but I think it's Netanyahu. And I'm sure my mother will laugh at me for not being able to pronounce that, but we'll leave that to a greater day. And you see how he also says that Israel is a very strong state, but is also a very vulnerable state because of its location, and you can branch that out to the rest of the Middle East, because you see how you can't really seclude that area of the world, because it's just such a not only vulnerable but very aggressive area, and they really don't understand any other language other than killing. So trying to find a middle ground isn't gonna really urge well with most of those people. So when it comes to that issue about whether or not we should have been pulling our troops back, we can now see why George Bush warned us on that idea, because you really got to see how how aggressive that area is, how it's going to be constantly adapting to whatever attacks. And seeing how ISIS is just growing and growing and growing, and it won't stop until it gets what it needs, especially to the extent of where they actually took out a hit list. They listed all of our service members and ranked them as the FBI would as terrorist organizations towards their government or their organization. So you really have to look towards how we're going about fixing something like this, and I think strong military presence, ground troops, air support, is going to be a thing that really is going to be about how ending this. And you could see that there's small spurts of I don't want to call it patriotism, but small spurts of people that are trying to attack ISIS in a way to seclude them and make them just as vulnerable as the rest of the Middle East. And so, I mean, really for me, it's just like, how do you let an organization like this get so big after the war, after we pulled out? And how are we going to end something like this? And I think that's going to be the greater question, and I hope I can bring that up with Bill Maloney as well next show. But you really have to look towards what can we do to end this, and I think that is going to be one of the biggest issues come this next election, foreign policy-wise. But, I mean, so far as where we are now, we aren't doing much. We're only providing air support, drones, attacks, and I feel like that's not going to be enough necessarily at the end of the day. We really need to be more proactive when it comes down to it. But, you know, what give take, I guess. But, you know, the whole issue is, it's very muddling. It's just as muddling as healthcare would be. But I thought I'd include that as well. I mean, I know I went over a very vague standpoint today, but, you know, I just wanted to get a few words in. But I actually haven't had a monologue in a very long time, so I'm very, very skeptical. I mean, but needless to say, this was fun. I'm glad I got to do it. Sad Bill Maloney could not be here today, but I hope he did good on the midterm today. But yeah, just Middle East needs to clean up. I mean, since seeing in the past, you can see with the Ottoman Empire how much of a rich area it was. I mean, especially when you look at how it was organized back in the day with the chakras. I think from my history, social studies classes that I take, and of how they organized their society as a whole, you can see how within these. I believe it's called chakra. So if I'm corrected, please tweet us. We're on Twitter at twitter.com/political gridiron. And of course you can find us on WICR Ustream. But correct me if I'm wrong. Within these chakras, they had the mosque, they had the church, they had the schools, then they had all the markets. It was like a very small compound of how life should be organized. And I think most people that aren't with ISIS still go about organizing their day like that. But I believe it's a very productive form of society. I mean, I think they got. From what I can assume, they got a lot done. They knew what they were getting themselves into, and it was just it's just really cool to see another society like grow and prosper such as that. I mean, I don't know how the Ottoman Empire ended, and I think it had to do something with World War One. I mean, with outside sources as well. I mean, including Europe. I mean, I don't know, but it really is an interesting subject for me that I wish to grow upon. I mean, and we'll see what goes on past then. So far as how long I've been going, I think I talked for an extra 5 minutes from what my clock is telling me, but I wanted to keep this short, sweet, bitter for those that find it bitter. But this is Patrick McGuire for Political Gridiron. This is only the one segment I'll be doing today. I apologize for our adamant listeners, but it's just my ugly face for today. I hope all well, and God bless, and go Gales.